Fundamentally, strategy is choice. It's the choice of the interaction, the activities that you're going to do that, move your business forward or ultimately differentiate you from a competitor. But at the beginning, it's just like, I am at a fork in the road. I can go down this path or the other. I can't go down both simultaneously. There's some decisions that are one-way door you cannot get back. Most decisions in life, especially early on, and whether it's tech or kind of a go-to-market, most are like the two-way door. You can easily back out of it. And that was kind of our perspective, that there was just going to inevitably be a lot of experimentation. My name is David Ciccarelli, the CEO and co-founder of Voices.
This is Code Story, a podcast bringing you interviews with tech visionaries who share in the critical moments of what it takes to change an industry and build and lead a team that has your back. I'm your host, Noah Labhart, and today how David Ciccarelli created the #1 audio services marketplace through a chance voice recording project. All this and more on Code Story. David Ciccarelli is a husband to his partner in life and business, Stephanie, and a dad to 4 kids, 1 boy and 3 girls. He loves to be doing anything outdoors, hiking, biking, etc., and has a cottage out in the country. His most memorable hike was near his hometown at the provincial park, where he climbed up to the top of the sleeping giant. Being a true Canadian, he was able to direct my suspicions about Poutine, which is French fries, gravy, and cheese curds, aka an indulgent dish. He said that it's more of a regular favorite in places like old Quebec, but most people enjoy it perhaps once a year, as you can't really have it every day. Growing up, David loved experimenting with sound, playing piano, tuning into radio stations, and tinkering with an old record player. He discovered there was an audio engineering program at school and set out with the goal of starting a small project recording studio. He met his now wife and co-founder through their first voice recording project, which then began to be advertised and attract more and more talent. This is the creation story of Voices.com.
Voices is an online marketplace. We connect voice buying clients, think of people at advertising agencies, video production companies, with that voice talent. Folks who have home recording studios. They've got a great voice, first and foremost, but they've built a home recording studio where they can read scripts. And it might be a 30-second radio commercial, a spot on a podcast. It might be, a video, an explainer video. And fundamentally, these clients are looking for that great voice to tell their story, to, educate, inform, and entertain their audience. But they don't know how to do it. They have a script written. Where do I go to find a great voice? So we've tried to fill that gap. Traditionally, those same kind of clients or buyers, if you will, they'd often work with a talent agency or an advertising agency who might hire a talent agency or a casting director and file actors in one after another into a recording studio. And that process would take a couple weeks' time. A casting director, people with the golden ears who sit in those high chairs, they cost like $1,500 for a day in New York City and LA. And we looked at that whole process and said, hey, how do you digitize that? How do you bring it from the offline experience and just create the digital equivalent of each of those steps in the process? So that's, there's lots of what we would know nowadays as like a freelance marketplace or kind of a gig marketplace. There's lots of them that are out there. Arguably the 2 biggest by far would be Upwork and Fiverr, who I have great respect and admiration for, given how far they've come. And what we've heard and understand is that there's increasingly kind of more specialized or niche verticals. Now we've been at this for, well over, just over 15 years. So, but we've just kind of picked this one vertical market and just gone after it all the way. But that's kind of what Voices is. I'd say most entrepreneurs, are either trying to scratch their own itch or they had some experience early on that they realized, wow, I might try to pursue this as a career, and perhaps that even turns into a business. And that was really my experience. Growing up, I loved sound. I played piano. I tinkered with, my dad had this old shortwave radio that I could tune into radio stations from around the world. We had an old record player that could listen to basically the recorded or spoken word, along with a lot of music. So I just tinkered with audio technology, if you will. And when it came to finding, a career path, I actually discovered there was an audio engineering school. And I went through that experience, and I remember on the first day of school, the headmaster, if you will, held up these two things, like a tennis ball in one hand and a microphone in the other, and he was standing in front of this big mixing console, like this 128 channel mixing console that looked like the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. It was so intimidating. And he held these two things up and he goes, if you don't know the difference between a tennis ball and a microphone, don't worry about it. You're here, you qualified to get in. You're obviously passionate about audio. We're going to teach you everything. And there was just the collective sigh of relief. And so I recall that because I just went so deep into it and really got the most out of that experience. And upon graduating, I realized, could work in another studio, could go do live sound on cruise ships. There's all kinds of really cool opportunities, but I wanted to start my own small project recording studio. So I did just that. I got a small $15,000 bank loan, bought some recording equipment, and opened up a little project studio in our hometown of London, Ontario. And no, I actually got my name in the newspaper on my birthday. It was actually a feature in Business London, and it was like a half-page photo and then a story about this small little studio I opened up. And it turns out that Stephanie, who's now, of course, my wife, and she's the co-founder of the company. At the time, she's a classically trained singer. She was at the music program at the university, and she'd sing at weddings and funerals and other special events on weekends. Her mom read that newspaper article, cut it out for her, and left it on her bed and said, hey, you should go get your singing repertoire recorded so you can hand out, CDs or, links to your audio recordings for somebody to hire you. And so Stephanie ended up coming down to the studio. We hit it off, recorded her singing repertoire. But there were other small businesses that wanted a female voice to record a voiceover, some phone system recordings and local commercials. And being kind of a nerd, I only knew one girl in the city, which was Stephanie, who I just met the day before. And I said, hey, Stephanie, you've got a great voice. How about I've got a gig that's come up. I'll be the engineer and you be the female voice talent. And you read it, I'll record it, and we'll split the money 50-50. And that's how we ended up started working together. And soon we kind of put up this, rather primitive site and featured Stephanie as the one voice talent. And that's kind of how it all began. We'd get, inquiries that would come in looking for to hire her or asking about other talent as well. But that was really the genesis of us kind of co-founding, both, I think, pursuing a passion in an area of interest and then realizing wow, this is working. How do we market ourselves better online and through the web? I jokingly say that I married my first customer, which is not marital advice whatsoever, but it just happened to work out.
Well, tell me about the MVP. So tell me about that first product. Maybe it's that first site or a little bit further along. You decide. But tell me about that first MVP. How long it took you and Stephanie to build, and what sort of tools you used to bring it to life.
As I described, it was a brochure-style website. I initially used to advertise the recording studio I operated before launching Voices. The site I designed entirely myself, borrowing books from the local public library. I took a web design for dummies. I downloaded a version of Dreamweaver from LimeWire, a file sharing site. Also Fetch, an FTP client, and that allowed me to basically download a static HTML page, make the changes in Dreamweaver, and then re-upload. And Dreamweaver is like a WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get type editor, and then re-upload. Yeah, that's why I figured I'd explain that. But I mean, this is like, you're basically hand coding static pages, and there was no database. And so those are some of the first tools. And, when we, just to kind of fill in the gap from like Stephanie to having the first number of other voice talent, like it was this static website. Other freelance voice talent would discover it through Google or some links that would put in like the old Yahoo directory or something along these lines. And they would say, oh, I see you have one female voice. I speak French. I'm a male voice talent. I can do child voices or young adult voices. And, the question was always, hey, can you put a link on my on your website and have a little link to a sample of my voice? And we always just said yes. And so that got up to, 100 names on it or so. And that was like the aha moment of going, wow, this is really emerging to become a two-sided marketplace connecting buyer and seller online from just this static directory. But anytime one of those talent wanted to change something on their profile, so like we hand-coded, like we had a template, but we hand-coded all their profile, we would literally have to, there was no login system. Like we'd have to download the page, make the changes, re-upload them, go and send them an email and be like, look good now, and they'd be like, yes, looks good to me. Like it was incredibly tedious. So we did end up hiring a web developer who, built a database and a login system so that talent could be more self-sufficient, while at the same time those clients, they could actually log in and post a job. And that was fundamentally the two, kind of interactions that we needed to happen. You need to have, in any two-sided marketplace, sufficient supply, in this case, the freelancer or the talent who have complete profiles. And then you got to generate the demand, which are those clients posting jobs, looking for work to get done. So that was extremely manual at the beginning. But the database and the login system was definitely a step forward.
Before we move on from that first product, I want to dig into a couple of things, though. So, with any MVP, first product, pilot, prototype, you got to make certain decisions and trade-offs, right? And it sounds like, it started with you and Stephanie. Stephanie was the first talent. I understand how you got there, and then people started reaching out, and you made decisions to add them to the site, right? Tell me about some of those decisions you made around the technology, right? Around, okay, we're not going to update it yet. We're going to stick with the template. And how you coped with those decisions, how you made those decisions, and went through that process.
Well, I love that you're using the word choices and decisions, because fundamentally strategy is choice. If you remember anything about strategy, is such a bantered around word, but fundamentally it's the choice of the interaction, like the activities that you're going to do that move your business forward or ultimately differentiate you from a competitor. But at the beginning, it's just like, I am at a fork in the road. I can go down this path or the other. I can't go down both simultaneously. And like I'm sure everyone's heard, like Bezos talks about the one-way door. Like this, there's some decisions that are one-way door. You cannot get back. Most decisions in life, especially early on, and whether it's tech or kind of a go-to-market, most are like the two-way door. You can easily back out of it. And that was kind of our perspective, that there was just going to inevitably be a lot of experimentation. But the first kind of decision that was felt major to us was, going from like a shared hosting environment to a dedicated server. We had everything on Rackspace, like one box, if you will, on Rackspace for years. That was a pretty key decision. Another one was we actually started under a different domain name. It was interactivevoices.com, which is a terrible mouthful of a name. And if I can tell a quick story on that, because I think there's often this like angst of like, well, when do I just get a name to get the first kind of couple hundred people, or do I invest in a brand? And we actually used Interactive Voices up until there was 10,000 users, registered users on the platform. And, it was around the time of like, Twitter and Flickr and everybody, it was like this whole Web 2.0 movement, like 2007-ish. And everything was like big and bright and bubbly, and people were dropping vowels from their name. And I was like, okay, we gotta smarten this thing up. Like, what if we could just be like Voxy or Vox.com or something? And all of those failed. I put in a bid of $100,000 for Vox.com and missed that auction. But we ended up realizing, like, rather than like a wholesale rebranding, what if it was a name simplification? I could just be like just voices and just cut out the interactive part. And I did what probably many of you have done. You just type it in, hand bomb it into Google, see what's even there, or like do a who is lookup. And it was actually a website called voices.com, silencing the critical voices in your head. And it was a medical journal from 1998 that hadn't been updated since 2000. And I was, yeah, exactly. Well, that's how I felt at the time. I'm like, wow, this is like the critical voice in my own head. I'm like, I want this name. We ended up meeting a lawyer in this co-working space that we were working from at the university, and said, hey, do you think you can reach out to this website, this domain owner, ask them if they would sell the name? If so, what price? And he ended up coming back and saying $50,000. I'm like, I don't have $50,000 on me. And he's like, well, what do you have? And I'm like, I have $5,000. He's like, well, why don't we put together a deal like that's $30,000, a little bit more than that, and we'll give him $5,000 every quarter, right, for the next 6 quarters. So we went with that offer, and with that, the fellow went for the deal. And so we were able to, looking back, in effect, kind of lift and shift the old website to the new website, to the new domain, on voices.com over a weekend. And the talent at the time were like, wow, this is great. It's such a stronger identity. In fact, we even benefited from all of the links, like these old, .edu links that were pointing to this previous site. And we just got a ton of traffic. Like, the site was registered in 1998. At the time, the age of the domain was, I would argue, overweighted in Google's, algorithm, and 98 was actually before Google itself. So it kind of looked like this really trustworthy domain, and our organic traffic from Google tripled, virtually over the weekend. So that was like a huge turning point. You just don't know. I think entrepreneurs are just going to have a high degree of conviction, and you weigh the alternatives, pros and cons, maybe some rudimentary risk assessment. Is this a one-way door? Is it a two-way? Can I back out of this? And in the end, you're like, it's probably just something you want to do. And so you make that move. But those were kind of a few of those key decisions that stand out in my mind.
That's a really cool story of the Voices domain and going after it. I love stories like that because, people have domains now, they've had them forever, and you kind of figure out how to make them happy to get it. Let's dive in a little bit to my next question. So it's around kind of product progression, right? How did you approach progressing the product? How did you approach maturing it? And I think to frame it a little bit, what I'm interested in is how you built your roadmap and how you decided, okay, this is the next most important thing to build in Voices.
So let's start with the really low-tech version. We actually, surprise, asked people, and I had a one-line question. Because for context, we did have a few hundred people, talent, I should say, sign up, and it was like kind of this just static directory. As soon as we started bringing jobs onto the platform, we did the math, and we said, it was like, how do we generate $100,000 of sales in a year? And we figured, well, we can sell an annual subscription. What if it was a membership-based website for the voice talent? We're marketing the talent. They're getting access to opportunities perhaps they wouldn't otherwise, and that's valuable to them. And so we went to market very early on. It was never freemium. It was only a premium membership, which was for $49 a year. And over the first weekend that we sent out that long-form email, with a PayPal link at the bottom, we did $5,000 of sales. So we knew like, oh wow, we're definitely on to something. Now we in effect made a brand promise, Noah, which was in exchange for your $50 annual subscription, we're going to go out and market and bring clients from ad agencies and video producers to the platform. I think we recognize that oddly at the very, very beginning, you probably need, there's the debate of, users first and monetize second. We actually we had kind of this initial seed of users of a few hundred. So, and then we kind of went quickly to monetize just because this was not like, there's no venture backed. We borrowed a bit of money, sold off that recording equipment I had mentioned, but I mean, we had literally a few $1,000s, kind of that was the extent of it. So from there though, what we asked, because we realized, wow, that clock's going to be ticking, the talent who subscribed are going to want two things. They're going to want to get a return on their investment for $50, which really meant, hey, can we deliver them a job, at least one job in the next year? The other thing is like, well, do we see that you're investing in the platform? And so to uncover, what was on the minds of the voice talent, and I'm going to use, for those listening, it's like substitute that of what's on the mind of your customers. We had two simple tools. One was, believe it or not, a toll-free phone number at the top of every page of the website. That phone line went right into our dining room and our dinette from where we were working at the time, just basically a condo. And then eventually we, had that co-working space I mentioned, and it was the same phone number. It's the same phone 1-888 number that we have today. And I'd always ask, like, nowadays it's all automated, like, what brought you to the site? But I'd be like, oh, that's, thanks for the call. Just out of curiosity, what, in the closing, like, oh, what brought you to the website today? Based upon like, hey, you've had a chance to navigate around. Is there anything that you were hoping to find that you couldn't? I'd ask a lot of these survey-based questions that you now see in chatbots, but I was just doing that kind of just naturally, and I just scribbled notes down. So that was one. Ask customers, especially when they're inbound. The other one was sending out an email, and it wasn't a survey or anything. It was a simple email. Again, big difference when it comes from a founder or a co-founder, and people kind of see that in the subject line. And it was simply, hey, if there was one thing we could build for you that would knock your socks off, what would that be? And that's exactly how, like, verbatim I described it. It was like, so people have to think not just like some little incremental thing. It was like the biggest idea that would wow them. And when we talk about the evolution of the product, and like, it really, we're just describing the ideation, and sometimes like, oh yeah, we had that idea. It was like kind of a +1. Oh, now it's a +2. So this very, pedestrian or rudimentary approach to product innovation, like, don't overcomplicate it. Basically ask customers and have them direct. But then there's the tension of also needing to kind of monetize your growth along the way as well too. And so while we did start with subscriptions, one of the challenges that is often had with freelance work, especially over like online, is the payment mechanism. While we were delivering work and they were, consummating these matches, if you will, between buyer and seller, the challenge often came down to payment. And there were enough instances where the talent would do the work, deliver it, and I'm talking like more than a decade ago, but do the work, deliver it, because it's an MP3 file or a WAV file, and then the buyer would just ghost. They just disappear. And the talent held us responsible, even though we didn't facilitate the payment. They wanted us to act on their behalf, and we realized the opportunity is to develop what's now known as an escrow service, where in effect Voices becomes that trusted intermediary between the talent doing the work and the client who's hiring. And so we actually capture the full payment up front. If you find somebody you want to work with, we capture the payment up front and by credit card. The talent has the peace of mind knowing that they're going to get paid because they see the money's, sitting there in their account. And the client knows in the rare situation the talent suddenly becomes ill or unavailable, that we can help them hire somebody else, or we'll just refund. We'll refund them. And so that's our kind of platform monetization approach now, and building out that was a pretty heavy lift as well too. And then finally, kind of just to close that off, I think more recently, and this was all before there was a VP of product or UXRs or anything. This was just candidly me and a technology leader and kind of a team of developers listening to customers and like kind of filtering it out. And the big step change, I think, for us was hiring a product leader who's since instituted more of like the pragmatic marketing approach to product development, really focusing on market problems, which I was already familiar with, and running it through, in effect, a Google design sprint-esque type process, kind of starting with like the discovery and design and validating along the way, and then shipping out in terms of deployment. And so I think that, and then we actually always end with a retrospective as well too, usually about 2 weeks after launch. We try to let the dust settle a little bit. But that has been a real, I think, sign of maturity of the company where, likewise, I've needed to step back. I think it's allowed other people to thrive, but still solving like real customer problems. That therein becomes the debate of like, how much of a problem is this? The pervasiveness and urgency of the problem. But I mean, that's just nuanced kind of conversation that has.
Let's switch to team then. So I know how you and Stephanie met. How did you build your team past that? And what did you look for in those people to indicate that they were the winning horses to join you?
I definitely look for data-driven employees. We have a saying that, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, just not your own facts. And so, generally it's come armed with data. So even when we were talking about these market problems, it's like, an instance of one is not a trend. So what is the evidence for this being so pervasive and persistent that we must solve it? So I look for, and I ask about that, in those, interviews. But because we base our decision on, both kind of the quantitative data, also the qualitative, I ask questions about, an important decision that maybe a candidate has made before, and how did they come up with that decision? And if I hear that they're like, oh, it was the first idea that popped into my mind, I'm like, ooh, I'm getting a little concerned, versus like if they lack like evaluating alternatives, that scares me just as much as, picking the first idea that comes to mind. So I want a methodical approach to decision making, and that by extension means, hey, a pretty logical approach to product development and following a process, like a repeatable process. It's not that there's no creativity. The creativity comes in the design of the solution, but the output of that solution is probably going to be a product requirements document that the development team has collaborated on, and everyone's agreed, yes, this is the way we're going to solve this particular problem, or at least our first crack at it. So I try to look for a pattern of not just in business, but even if, maybe a candidate, mentions that they've recently moved. Oh, that's really interesting. Were you looking for, a new apartment for long? Why did you decide on that particular location? What was it about this location? How did you evaluate all your options? I'm sure there must have been tough to choose, right? And you're kind of just trying to draw out and do that active listening for that decision-making process. That's what I listen for in new employees.
This episode is sponsored by Vanta. You're a startup founder. Finding product market fit is probably your number one priority. But to land bigger customers, you also need security compliance. And obtaining your SOC 2 or ISO 27001 certification can open those big doors. But they take time and energy, pulling you away from building and shipping. And that's where Vanta comes in. Vanta is the all-in-one compliance solution helping startups like yours get audit ready and build a strong security foundation quickly and painlessly. How, you ask? Vanta automates the manual security tasks that slow you down, helping you streamline your audit. And the platform connects you with trusted VCSOs to build your program, auditors to get you through audits quickly, and a marketplace for essentials like pen testing. Join over 8,000 companies, including many Y Combinator and Techstars startups who trust Vanta. Simplify compliance and get $1,000 off at vanta.com/codestory. That's VANTA.com/codestory. This episode is sponsored by Kinsta. Between juggling client meetings, managing your website, and keeping up with everyday tasks, who has the time to stress out about website security? Well, with Kinsta, the technical stuff is taken care of, so you can focus on what you do best. Kinsta provides managed hosting for WordPress, offering lightning-fast load times, top-tier security, and unmatched human-only customer support. Whether you're a business owner, web developer, or running a digital agency, Kinsta makes managing your website easy and efficient. Kinsta provides enterprise-grade security, being one of the few hosting providers for WordPress with SOC 2 and other certifications, guaranteeing the highest level of security for your website. Thanks to their unlimited free expert-led migrations, Kinsta ensures a smooth transition for you from other hosting providers. Customers have reported 200% faster load times post-migration to their platform. What I find cool about Kinsta is their fast and reliable customer service and premium features that are included at no extra cost. Ready to experience Kinsta's hosting for yourself? Get your first month free when you sign up at kinsta.com today. That's KINSTA.com.
Well, let's switch to scalability. It'll be interesting to kind of hear your take on this and how you've approached it over time. But did you build this to scale efficiently from day one, or were you fighting this as you grow?
Some parts were built to scale, and other parts were sorely neglected. For instance, Salesforce, we had the enterprise version of Salesforce early on, which was, again, in hindsight, a little crazy that it was Stephanie and I having a two enterprise license of sales. I don't even think they sell them for like under 10 people nowadays. But we had 2 enterprise licenses. This was way before they were a publicly traded company, very, very early on. But that was an example of a system that scaled very well. I was the admin for the first 10 years, so I knew it inside and out. I would be the one, exporting from a MySQL database and importing all the data into Salesforce. It wasn't even automated, and eventually we got it to do so. So I think our back-end systems that customers didn't necessarily see, those tended to scale quite well. And for those who have used Salesforce over the years, they've gone from far more than merely kind of managing customer support cases and sales and customer data, sales opportunities and so forth. But you could basically build whole new applications in there. So we had our HR system, our recruiting system, all in Salesforce. Even our financial system was built on Salesforce, which was not great, but we were almost asking it to do more than really it was built to do. But we were getting a lot out of one system. The web technology, we didn't scale so much. I mentioned we ran on a single server of Rackspace for, again, really that first decade. And that, great uptime. They have their, fanatical support, as they call it. But I think we realized, and I'm talking like one utility, which had both the application and the database and all the file storage all on one system or on one box. So as soon as we ended up parsing out all of the files, the audio files, because voice talent are uploading samples of their voice for their profile, but also the auditions. And we moved that to Amazon S3 quite early on. And I remember the cost differential was a Rackspace server that was $2,000 a month to Amazon S3, which was $2.13 a month. So we're just like, okay, this is clearly the future. And over the subsequent years, we did pretty meaningful, I used the term earlier, I think, lift and shift from switching wholesale from Rackspace to Amazon, which now it's multi-instance, it's, redundancy, with, infrastructure around the world, CDNs, firewalls, load balancers, final, like, proper backup system. Like, it's so much more sophisticated. But I think that was one of those areas that was like outside of my area of expertise. So needing to find like cloud architects that could do that well. And it wasn't that it was getting to I think the cost was a big motivator. I think the lack of redundancy was just creating, anxiety and realizing, well, hey, we're kind of operating on borrowed time here. It's just, we might not see a huge performance increase, but it will allow us to continue to scale. Generally speaking, Noah, my philosophy has been buy and build systems 10x bigger than you need, because 10x you can grow into actually pretty fast. Now, it might sound like you're over-engineering and over-investing in the future, but that certainly has played out well with both Salesforce and Amazon as being, two examples where you need to invest in a bit extra capacity, whether it's for this year or next year, or you're kind of in a longer term, like if you're making let's call it like a long-term technology decision, I try to think 10x where we are today, not necessarily 10 years, but just 10x where we are today. Will that decision still hold true?
You're giving yourself enough runway, believing in what you're building, seeing the traction from the market. It's sort of like being a step ahead, right, in your infrastructure and your technology. I'm a CTO, and so that's where I like to play. Is like, I just want to be a step ahead because I don't want to be, working 120 hours a week either, trying to bring something up from, a brittle infrastructure.
Yeah, or like replacing what you just put in last year because, we decided to go with some new upstart that's just trying something out. Like, that's what I think a lot of startups have a big challenges with. You're either selling to other small to medium-sized businesses, or, large enterprises are just going to be tremendously risk adverse to like, why would we? So you almost need to communicate to them that, that we're built to scale so that they feel more comfortable as well.
Well, as you step out on the balcony and you look across all that you've built, what are you most proud of?
I'd say the marketplace itself. I love that we're living out our mission to become the definitive destination for hiring creative talent. Bringing all of these parties together. If our desire is to put good messages out in the world, that the content that people are hearing, is encouraging, it's uplifting, and we're a means of having that, those words spoken. I think that is tremendously rewarding. Then there's the angle, if you will, of the talent themselves, who these are independent people who had a dream to, maybe they did silly voices as kids or performed in a play and always thought, wow, could I do that? And could I build a career doing that? And we either through kind of, video interviews, or people just send us in great notes of like life change, particularly over the last, 18 months, 2 years, if you will, during the pandemic, where people were either kind of stuck or locked at home, and just use that as an opportunity to say, I'm going to give this a go, and are grateful that they had, a partner like Voices to, pursue a career voice acting. So we hear those stories all the time. We share them at our weekly stand-up, which we call the Huddle. And, whether it's customer stories or customer impact, that I think is really rewarding. So it's a bit of an intangible. But when I ask, again, both whether I'm sitting in an interview and it's kind of a group interview, and the candidate asks the rest of us, well, what is it you like working, like, why do you like working at Voices? What stands out to you? And this theme of customer impact keeps coming up, that we're in some small ways, changing people's lives or just helping their messages get out there that perhaps otherwise couldn't. So that's rewarding for me.
Well, let's flip the script a little bit. Tell me about a mistake you made and how you and your team responded to it.
I don't know if this is definitely I don't know if it's a mistake, but certainly one that comes to mind is, perhaps it is a mistake, which is underestimating the response from users or underestimating customer response. Again, brief story here was we did end up raising nearly $20 million in a Series A from Morgan Stanley, a global investment bank in San Francisco. And part of the use of proceeds was to acquire a then competitor. And we actually interviewed a number of their customers to ensure, like, hey, they were going to be comfortable and okay and understand kind of where this is going to go without disclosing that we were acquiring them. Like, hey, what if we could partner with them, and this type of conversation. And in the end, when the announcement was made, both during the capital raise and the acquisition, there was just this, what I would coin like this just irrational market response of, this fear that we were becoming, too big, when really it's a 120 person company in Canada. Like, it's not that big of an organization. We're not Google. Yet there was this concern that it was going to have a negative impact on them. And that, admittedly, it did not see coming, particularly because I had done the roadshow myself and visited these customers in New York and LA and Chicago and San Francisco, and just, I didn't understand. So afterwards, I kind of reran that roadshow and went to go see the same people again. And I go, I don't understand. And I looked in their eyes and I realized that they were concerned for their livelihoods. It was a lot of talent agents who are in some ways the very entities that are being disrupted. It's a long old school business that's being disrupted by freelance and online work, where they were once the gatekeepers, if you will. And, a platform comes along where they're not as, they just had previously not embraced. They didn't understand the technology in the same way, or how just to use it. And so, kind of revisiting that, those same folks, I realized they were concerned for their personal livelihood. That's what it was all about, and it was just this reaction, kind of against us, where we had no ill will. In fact, we went to lengths to build partnerships and relationships, but it just unfortunately wasn't reciprocated. So whether that was a mistake to acquire that company and kind of try to roll it in, I'm not sure. I still feel like that was strategically the right move to make, but the unanticipated consequence, that's the part that we definitely talk through now, even in our retros and even in our product release planning, is how might this be perceived? As you say, flip the script, it's like, oh, we think it's all going to be like sunshine and rainbows and unicorns, and like, every change you make, someone's going to feel like you took something away from them. It's not what it used to be, right down to like moving a button or, sorting a table from ascending to descending. It's like that changed their day, especially for products where there's routine in, I've always done it this way. And then you change it, or in our situation, it completely disappeared because we merged the two platforms together. That's, I think, where there is a lot of concern for their own livelihood, which going forward, I would encourage those, again, listening, think about the consequence. Not everyone's, how might somebody interpret this? And it's hard to think about it that way because you think you're doing nothing but good. But how might someone view this as being negative to them? And how can we either change the messaging, or do we really need to push it this far? And maybe it means just dialing it back a little bit, or rolling something out in 2 or 3 iterations instead of one big one. Those are some kind of mitigating approaches.
It sounds like you did everything you could do beforehand, because I don't know that I've ever heard of anybody interviewing customers to see how it was going to impact them. I feel like it was completely unanticipated.
And I think that was kind of the hard part, as you want to take someone's perspective at kind of face value. It's like, you're telling me this, like this, that what we're building and talking about building is going to be exactly what you want. Which is why I think there is, kind of tying this back to, product as well. There is certainly a lot of validity in running a survey or doing an interview ahead of time, but until that release is out there and people are using it, particularly if there's a monetary component of it, like a price sensitivity test is completely different than putting a buy now button on your page with a credit card form. And people will say all kinds of things in a survey. You don't know who's filling the survey out, but wow, when that's online, it's kind of like that's the real deal. And I put far more stock in kind of real world behavior when something's live. So I have a tendency to kind of like, well, let's just push to get it out there. Like, do we have enough information to be confident that it has, a chance to be successful? Versus trying to aim for perfection kind of in the lab or in isolation. It's better to get like real world data.
Well, what does the future look like for Voices, for the product and for your team?
Well, there's many things we've learned in the last couple of years, certainly that the future is unpredictable. I think we'd agree on that one. And we need to remain flexible, need to pivot as need be. But, I think one of the things that's kind of, stood out to me and that is kind of leading into the future is that for the last while, we've really just been a voice-only marketplace. And through that, we've recognized that there's other complementary creative services that need to get done. So, while voice might be at the heart of the production, Noah, maybe there's some pre-production services. Somebody needs to write a script. Maybe they need that script to be translated into another language. And then, of course, the voiceover gets recorded, which is kind of where our strength is. But then, inevitably afterwards, there's maybe some audio editing that needs to get done, mixing in music. And so for that, the immediate present and future certainly is the evolution of this marketplace to recognizing that our talent are really multifaceted, and how do we enable them to showcase additional skills, and as well as how do we enable them to get hired for those skills. So just recently, we're kind of widening it, the marketplace up from being purely voice to other creative services, still are, centered around voice and audio, but we have music, audio production, and translation. Looking at some other complementary ones even still, but those are brand new, just in the last kind of couple weeks. So that's exciting to see how those build and evolve over time. So that I'm definitely excited about, and perhaps we've done business in 160 countries around the world. It's still kind of 3/4 of all the activity is in the US. Are there global expansion opportunities as well too? So those are the two vectors of growth that I see for Voices as a product and our team, which are additional category expansion and even kind of stretching those boundaries into new geographies as well, geographic expansion.
Well, let's switch to you, David. Who influences the way that you work? Name a CEO, a CTO, an architect, really any person. Name a person that you look up to and why.
One person I look up to quite a bit, I've listened to a lot of his books, would be Patrick Lencioni. Patrick is, he probably wouldn't like the being coined a management consultant, but I would say that would be his MO. He writes a lot of these business fables, and they're just kind of short stories, like Death by PowerPoint, and the 5 dysfunctions of a team, the temptations of a CEO, but they're done in story format. They're great as audiobooks. So I think he's got a smart way to describe the challenges of business that almost kind of paint this character that you can identify with. So and more than just his approach to, communicating, which he's an excellent communicator. The other thing he's come up with is, talking about how the importance of having a healthy culture. And health isn't always, just the smartest people in the room. It's actually people that can exhibit empathy, that can exhibit, clarity of thought and clarity in communication. And so it's important to have smart, healthy organizations, not just purely data-driven or just purely logical. It's a more well-rounded organization, like the IQ as much as the EQ, if you will. So he's fantastic. And his latest bit from Patrick Lencioni is, if you've ever done, a personality test, like a Myers-Briggs, he's come up with this concept called the working genius, which talks about the different roles that are in the workplace. Because personality tests, most of them are just that, for kind of like it's all around relationships and a lot of personal relationships. And there's certainly many parallels into the workplace. But he's specifically focused on this working genius and uncovering these new personas, if I could use that, such as, the discerner. It's one thing to have the wonderer who's coming up with the new ideas, and then the visionary who kind of puts it into practice, and the galvanizer gets everyone all excited. But you can't just jump right to let's just go do it. There's this discernment piece of, I'm not sure that's the right time to do it. I'm not sure, or maybe that might be better bundling these two work packages together. And that is a very often overlooked skill within an organization, to create a bit of pause to evaluate alternatives. And he's uncovered these type of working geniuses. It's a great podcast. My wife's got me into it quite a bit, but I followed him for years, so I think he's a pretty smart guy.
Well, we talked about a mistake, but a little bit different spin. If you could go back to the beginning, what would you do differently, or where would you consider taking a different approach?
Well, it's easy now to say what you would do differently. I think there's some times where, even just from a practical standpoint, I wish I moved faster and made decisions, knowing what I know now and how it played out. I probably would have been a lot more aggressive, or invested a lot more in Google AdWords way earlier when it was 5 cents a click, which now it's $2. So there's, a little bit of tongue in cheek, but there's those kind of, they're not even regrets. It's just, I even apply that now and go boy, cost of online traffic, of just buying new visitors to your website, is probably only going up. There's just more businesses competing. So let's be diligent about doing that. No, I think looking back, sometimes when both giving and receiving, a no, that have to interpret that sometimes it actually means no, and therefore just move on. So probably lost time, hoping that something might magically turn into a yes. Other times it actually means not yet. And having that, whether it's, I guess discernment or intuition, or even just asking let me help me understand, does this actually mean no? Or are you just saying, hey, maybe I should, truly I should actually kind of come in and check in, next year. I think that's a really important skill, if you will, when starting out in business or as an entrepreneur. You're going to hear a lot more of those no's, and just kind of understanding maybe I should just let them go, and not everything's a not yet, but if it is a not yet, then it's worthy of holding on to. And then probably, on the flip side, I'd also step back from pressing on a topic maybe too long, holding on to something that I believed to be true or knew to be true, but in again, having this high degree of conviction, and then not actually having a lot of backup for it. So only now it's like I can't expect the rest of the team to come armed with data or customer insights or a customer story to validate something. Likewise, I need to live up to that as well too. So it's really maybe it's in that ideal team player, Noah, which sounds like you'd be a great ideal team player. But living out kind of like what you expect from others. And kind of living that out day to day, not having like almost like this double standard. Not that I think that was the case, but I think it just took me longer to mature in my own career to recognize that I need to, we all need to kind of play by the same rules of engagement when making decisions.
I appreciate the kind words. Last question, David. So you're getting on a plane and you're sitting next to a young entrepreneur who's built the next big thing. They're jazzed about it. They can't wait to show it off to the world. Can't wait to show it off to you right there on the plane. What advice do you give that person having gone down this road a bit?
The advice that I'd give to that person is, first and foremost, you're going to be taking things day by day. We talk about this 5-year plan and it's going to be successful next year and so forth. But the day by day is actually really important because it causes you to certainly live in the present, to make sure you're making good decisions today. And we talked about strategy being, in effect, choices. So how might you make good choices? And this tool, this mental model was given to me, and it's actually a whole book by Susie Welch, who is the bright woman in her own right. And she has this concept called 10-10-10. Which basically says whenever you come to that fork in the road, you need to evaluate that choice based upon, the next 10 minutes, the next 10 months, and the next 10 years. And what I love about that is that it frames up kind of short, medium, and long-term consequences. Because too often we're just going to say, oh yeah, no, it's going to be great next year. It's like, or I'm going to feel good in 10 minutes or 5 minutes from now. I might feel good, but then I realize it was actually a bad decision. It's going to have longer term consequences. Now, I've certainly not been perfect on this by any stretch, but I think when you get to those moments to say, I'm being pressed to make a decision now. I know I need to make a decision now, but let me make the decision now, not hastily so that I can just move on to the next thing, but thoughtfully, in the context of the next 10 months and the next 10 years. And I think that's great, whether it's personal relationships or whether it's a technology deployment or, I would imagine in your role, a critical technology choice. It's kind of that 10x scale idea. I'm like, oh, great, I made the decision for 10 months, but I don't want to have to revisit it again. So I would probably, like I'm doing here today, I'd probably try to share that tool. Because more times than not, it's actually served me quite well.
That's great advice. Well, David, thank you for being on the show today. Thank you for telling the creation story of voices.
Good to be here, Noah. Thanks for having me.
And this concludes another chapter of Code Story. Code Story is hosted and produced by Noah Laphart. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcasting app of your choice. Support the show on patreon.com/codestory for just $5 to $10 a month. And when you get a chance, leave us a review. Both things help us out tremendously. And thanks again for listening.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. Just go to Indeed.com/PODKATZ12 right now And support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.